Well, thank you so much for joining with us online today. My name is Stephen, and it's my great privilege to be opening the Word of God with you today. And so, I've got a question to start off with, and I wonder how comfortable you are with letting people borrow your stuff. Perhaps you've had good experiences around that, or maybe less so. I remember not so long ago, a lady in the church was in need of a car, and so I lent my little Fiesta at the time to this lady, and I tell you what, this car had never been treated so good. It came back looking shinier than ever, it was smelling good, and most important of all, it was full of petrol as well. But I wonder whether you've had an experience like that, or maybe not so much. In fact, I was scrolling through my social media stream the other day, and you kind of get all these life hacks, don't you? Now, the one picture that I saw was, or the one bit of advice, was to take a picture of your friend with the thing that you have lent them. So you've kind of got this proof of what your friend has taken away from you. So whether it's a DVD or a book or a piece of clothing, you get a picture of them, and it kind of you've got that on your phone to show that they have taken that away. In fact, our new series is called The Pursuit of Godly-ness. Yes, we've kind of shamelessly taken it from Will Smith's brilliant film, The Pursuit of Happiness. In fact, I was kind of in two minds about whether a Will Smith reference would be appropriate given the latest headlines. But as long as I don't make any jokes about any of the pastors' wives, then we shouldn't start a Solihull slapgate anytime soon. But we're going to be exploring this idea of the pursuit of godliness and what that looks like, and particularly thinking about how we are to steward our time and our talents and our treasures. But that kind of word steward or stewardship is very churchy, isn't it? And we all probably come to this idea with our own ideas. So just by way of activating our prior knowledge around this, and you at home might want to just pause the video as you think about this for a minute, is what is the difference between an owner and a steward? So we're going to do two really simple things today. Number one is firstly just to define what we mean by stewardship. And then we're going to dive into 1 Timothy, where we're going to look at some guiding principles for how we might be able to lay a bit of a foundation for Justin, who brings the message next week, and maybe some more messages around our time management as well. So I thought a good place to start is on page 1 of the Bible. Not hard to find, so if you are following along at home, you might want to grab a Bible or on your phone and go to page 1 of the Bible. And here we see on day 6 that God the Father has this really busy day. He creates animals, the cattle get a special mention, but the wild animals, all that's creeping along the earth, but also he creates mankind as well. Really busy day. And so in verse 26 of chapter 1 is where we're going to start off this today. So it reads, "Then God said, 'Let us make humankind,'" or mankind, "'in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion or rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth.' So God created humankind in his image, in the image of God, he created them." So we kind of keep on getting this phrase, don't we? The image of God. Or you might have heard us talk about maybe being a bearer of the image of God. And I wonder what that means to you. We know, of course, that the people of God were told not to make images of anything for themselves, but instead to recognize that they were indeed image bearers of God. There's something of God's nature, his character, his responsibility and his rule that he was imparting not into animals who had the breath of God within them, like humans, but the distinction is that they were called to rule and to reign, to take dominion and to subdue the earth, to almost take partnership in God's creative work and to subdue that creation, to almost take it in a positive direction. And I thought of this analogy, which might be helpful for you at home today. So my little lad is 3 years old, and just before the Easter break this year, he brought home from school, rather excitedly, a little planted sunflower seed. So he brings it home and he's told to water it, to put it in a sunny place, and of course, talk to it daily. Else, we all know that nothing happens if we don't talk to our plants. And so he did this, and he was really excited about this. But the real joy came when that little seed germinated, cracked out that outer shell, and that shoot sprung up. And almost this miracle of life just burst forth in front of his very eyes. And there was almost a joy there for my son as he was partnering, doing his part, but partnering in God's creative work. And I thought that's quite a helpful analogy for what Adam and Eve were experiencing in the Garden of Eden. In verse 29, we read on, and it says, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed," this is God talking, "that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." So here's lesson 1 in stewardship. And I'm sorry if this is a bit of a bombshell. We don't actually own anything. The source of all that we have is from God's abundant provision. So where you're sitting now, the bricks and mortar that are perhaps around you are from the ground of his earth. The oxygen that you're breathing in are from the trees that have produced that oxygen from a seed of God's creation. Even the shoes or the slippers on your feet are from materials found in the earth that maybe we have adapted for our purposes. And this is the huge mind shift. And it says in James, doesn't it? Every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there's no shadow or variation or turning. And this is the huge mind shift for us, that if we get this, we perhaps will reflect on how tightly we cling to our treasures and our talents and even our time. Psalm 24 verse 1 would say, "The earth is the Lord's, and all that's in it, the world and those who live in it." How much would that change our life if we really understood that everything we have is because of him? You know, if you've ever rented a flat or a house or even a car, you know, it looks like your own. It feels like your own. You might pretend that it's your own, but we all know that it doesn't belong to you, especially the landlord. He knows definitely that it doesn't belong to you. And that's an interesting name, isn't it? The landlord, almost that the master of the house. He's almost lending, well, maybe not lending, but lending at a price this rented property. It's only when we want our deposit back, when the contract ends, that flat has never looked so clean, or indeed that polyfiller comes out and we start patching up the wall where we've whacked a nail in over the period of time that we've been in there. We know then that this was just something we were borrowing for a time, and now we need to hand back. This is somewhere near what I think stewardship might look like. So moving on, chapter 2, Genesis, verse 15, says, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it." Yeah, a bit of news for you. Work came before the fall of mankind. There was something in God's nature. We see that he's working in the days of creation, but now he invites humans to partner with him to till it and keep it. That means to work it, to watch it, and to preserve it. So we might define stewardship a bit like this: the management of the property of another. The management of the property of another. And I wonder if we truly believe that about the clothes that I wear, the food that I eat, the house that surrounds me. How might that cause me to think again about how tightly I cling to some of those things? Now, as we read through the narrative of the whole Bible, we get this invitation to keep coming back to this place of God being the provider of all things. And so as we read in Genesis 2, there's almost like another story of creation, or another angle on the creation story, which speaks about these two trees that are in the midst or in the middle of the garden. There's the tree of life, the tree that symbolizes God's abundant provision for his creation, almost like this holy hotspot of that connection between heaven and earth, the place of fullness and life and provision for us. There's also another tree. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Adam and Eve are told strictly, do not eat of it. Now, it looks good. It may even taste good. It seems sensible and logical to partake of it, but they're told not to. It symbolizes man's choice to know better than God, to define what is right and wrong in their own life. It symbolizes a lack of trust in Creator God, in the tree of life, and saying, do you know what? I think I can work this out for myself. I can see that this looks sensible, this looks logical, and so I'm going to pursue that path instead. Of course, we see the catastrophic unfolding of what happens when sin enters the world, and that absence or that rejection of God's provision comes into play. And we can all get on our holy high horses, can't we? Our self-righteous position and say, what were they thinking? Man, they kind of just ruined it for us all. But if we put the mirror on ourselves for a minute, we probably, like me, can think of times when I didn't trust in the provision of God, when I got worried about what the future might look like, or I've felt crippled by the price of energy prices going through the roof, or I've seen what I think is sensible and logical and expected, and I've got frustrated when God hasn't got involved in my plans. It doesn't take us long to see ourselves in that Eden narrative. But God's desire is constantly to pull us back to that place of connecting with him as our ultimate provider and being and creating with him. And we read time and time again this kind of Eden imagery appears through the Old Testament. In fact, I've been geeking out a little bit in the Bible. I know what you're thinking. I need to get more of a life. But there's this amazing kind of pathway through the Old Testament which symbolizes this bringing back to God, and it's often symbolized by a tree or this place of Eden in a wilderness. And we see it with Abraham, we see it with Moses, we see it with Noah. Even Jesus himself, as we come to the New Testament, would say, I'm the vine, you are the branches. He that remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So this invitation keeps coming to say, yeah, I'm your provider, but work with me and hold what you have loosely in your hand. We've all got to come to that point, haven't we? We've all got to come to that point in our faith journey of saying there is something bigger than me, and there is something that is providing my every single need, a transcendent being. For me, this came at the age of 17, nearly 18, and I was sitting in a service in Bloxwich. I can remember the room, I can remember the seat, and I would say that was the first time that I felt the Spirit of God awaken something within me. The speaker was talking from Romans 12. You might know it. It talks about a living sacrifice and offering ourselves to God, offering up our plans, offering up our desires, offering up our wills in view of God's mercies. Now, just before that, in chapter 11, there's this incredible kind of doxology, this praise of God, which magnifies him and his greatness. And it finishes that part by saying that for from him, this is Jesus, and through him, that's Jesus, and for him, that's Jesus, are all things. To him be glory forever. And you know, as soon as I realized the magnitude of God and the greatness of God and his love towards me, my response is just to go, I got nothing. I realize that me on my best day, me with my best efforts is like nothing in God's sight. The wisdom of the wise he brings to nothing. The Bible would say your righteousness, you on your best day is a bit like filthy rags. It's a bit like my little boy when he was potty training, delighted that he's done his business in the right place. And he's always telling me about it. Look, Daddy, look at what I've done. And I'm going, yep, that's great, but it's still a poo. That's kind of, I think, how God might see, yeah, God, I've done all of this. I've achieved so much. I'm doing so much for you. And he goes, wonderful, Steve. That is so good. But it's still a little bit like your son's potty. We fall so far short of God's standard that we need to rely on God's provision in Jesus Christ for our salvation. Pastor Johnny said something really good once. Well, he says loads of good things, but this thing particularly stood out for me. And he said, religion will tell you to earn your life. That's like, I've got to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve some sort of success in God's eyes. Now, the world does something different. The world would say, make your life. Find your true self. Be who you want to be. Be the best version of yourself and make yourself whatever you want to be. But Jesus would say, lose your life. Whoa, lose your life? What on earth is he talking about? He's saying, come and be part of me, because true life is found in me, the image of God himself within Jesus Christ. Come and journey with me. Come and be part of my story. Come and be involved in my creative work, and you will thrive in the presence with me. So, here we go. As we come to 1 Timothy, if we are to steward what we have got, what does this look like, and what are the guiding principles here? Well, it's hard, isn't it? Because our world isn't geared up to honour the God who richly provides all things. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The world would say, you don't have enough, and your life would be better if you had that car, or that bag of crisps, or that delivery from Uber, or that fancy perfume. All of these things are the message, the narrative of our society is saying you haven't got enough and your life would be better if only you had these things. It's the opposite of walking with God. So I wonder whether I could just ask you at home there. I'm tempted to ask you to raise your hand, but I'm going to resist the inner primary school teacher within me. And I wonder which of these statements most applies to you. So thinking about your finances, would you say, A, I've got just enough. I am absolutely content with what I've got. B, do you know what? I'd like a little bit more. I think I'd just be a little bit happier if I had a bit more. Or C, I've got way too much, actually. I've got too much stuff. I'm getting paid way too much. Just got too much stuff. Too much money. I wonder which of those most applies to you. Now, if we're honest, we probably are a little bit like, I've forgotten the order of A, B, and C. But I imagine if you're like me, you probably think you're better off if you just had a bit more. That extra few thousand in the salary, that maybe extra space at home. I think our lives might be just better if I just had that next thing. And of course, that's kind of the story of our world, isn't it? And we're told that endlessly. So we need to correct a few things and just refresh a few things. And the Bible will be our guide here. So 1 Timothy. Now, if you don't know the book of Timothy, Timothy is a young Christian leader in the city of, the wealthy city actually, of Ephesus. And the Apostle Paul is writing to Timothy, giving him this guidance, this help of how to look after the flock, the church of Ephesus. And he writes in chapter 6 and verse 17. So if you're following along, 1 Timothy 6 verse 17, it says this: "Command those who are rich in the present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. And so I just want to pull out a few key words there to help unpack what I think Paul is probably getting at here. First of all, he says about the present world. Command those who are rich in the present world. And straight away, we can infer that if there's a present world, well, there's also a future world. And the things of this present world, if there is a future world, must not last forever. There must be a temporality to the things that I own and the stuff that I acquire. There's another life to be lived. And Paul would say elsewhere that our citizenship, our home, is with heaven, and we are to represent God, almost being ambassadors of the kingdom of God, bringing a challenge in our own lives and the lives of those around us by the way that we view our finances, the way that we view our treasures and our talent and our time. You know, I'm kind of just gearing up in my school life as a teacher. We're taking my class away for a mini little residential break. And I'm going to be talking to them about who are you representing when we're away. And I want them to know that wherever we go, whoever we talk to, whenever we're washing our plates or moving about the site or interacting with a group leader, you are representing our school. And I wonder if we take that question for us, how well do we represent the kingdom of God? If we were to pull apart your bank account and my bank account, or your time or my time, would there be enough evidence for us to say, yes, you are an ambassador, a representative of being a citizen of heaven? I wonder. So let's move on. It tells us not to be arrogant. Now, it's really easy, isn't it, for our sense of success and security to be wrapped up in the things that I've acquired, the status I've got, and the things that I have achieved. And these aren't necessarily bad things, but I think there's a question there about, have you got that stuff, or has that stuff got you? Are you able to let go of it, or are you being driven by it and finding your sense of worth and security within it? You see, to be arrogant is opposite to the Christ life. In your version of the Bible, it might say the word conceited or high-minded or proud. And all of these words are completely opposite to what Christ modeled for us. You see, Jesus showed us what it's like to rule and to reign and subdue the earth. And it was like none of us was expecting, even those closest to him. For he ruled and reigned in submission and service, in sacrifice and selflessness. That's how Jesus modeled ruling and reigning, subduing and taking dominion in his world. And I think it was because all he did was eat of the tree of life. All he did was recognize that God was the supplier of all of his needs, and therefore he could trust in the provision of the Father. You see, we see him wrestling with this in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night when he's betrayed. And he says this, he says, Father, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. You see, in that moment, he had to trust the will of the Father above what he saw as logical and sensible and reasonable and expected, and said, no, although that sounds really good, I'm going to trust in the purposes of God the Father. You see, when we come into contact with a generous host, a generous provider, our lives are challenged to echo that in our own and other lives around us. If we've come into contact with the generous love of God, then we too should show generosity of love to those around us. Let's move on. The passage says, do not put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. You know, we'd all like a little bit more, but, well, why is that? Well, I suppose we might feel like we're a little bit more secure. We're a bit more, life can be a bit more expected and safe. But the apostle here says those things are so uncertain. You know, if you were to walk around Smith's Toy Superstore with my little family, you'd be forgiven for thinking that my children are the most deprived children in the world. Because as we walk through those shelves of plasticness, the questions come. Daddy, can we buy that? Daddy, how many coins is that? Daddy, can we put that on my birthday list? Because that looks really, really good. There is a striving or a want for more and more and more. And you've only got to see the temporality of that by opening the top drawer in our dining room. A toy cupboard, the top drawer is just full of plastic tat. I'm sure every parent watching gets what I'm talking about. But it's just rubbish. You know, the middles of Kinder Egg toys, or the, fidget spinners and fidget poppers. We've got a drawer full of it. In fact, multiple drawers full of this rubbish, which shows even from the earliest of age. It looks good. It seems like what I want. It seems like what I need. But you know what? By the time I'm home, I'm kind of over it. Kind of the tat has just kind of lost its worth. But we've all got things, haven't we? Whether we've saved really hard to get the car of our dreams, and then, 5 years later, it's not quite as cool as we thought it was. It might got a few bumps or a few scrapes, and we're kind of getting a bit fed up with it. Or you've loved getting the latest iPhone or iPad or something, but before long, the bugs come on, it kind of slows down. There's a new version out that can has got a better camera or a better pencil or whatever it might be. And we quickly move on. Our hope in wealth is so uncertain. Here's the contrast, though, that the Apostle Paul would say. It's a hope in God who richly provides for us. Here's our invitation to come back to the tree of life, a place of dependence, a place of thankfulness, a place of receiving from the generosity of God and allowing that to change our lives. In Luke 12 and Matthew 6, those famous words of Jesus, he says, do not worry. Look at the birds of the air. They don't sow or gather into barns, but even those, your heavenly Father feeds them. Don't worry about your clothes or what you'll wear. Look at the lilies of the valley. Not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of those. He says instead, seek first my kingdom. Eat of the tree of life. Come and be part of my story. Come and be satisfied in me. And all of his righteousness and everything else will be added unto you, as it goes on to say. Last but not least is this word enjoyment. God who richly provides everything for our enjoyment. And I did a bit of Googling around this, finding out the original word. And it's this word, I'm probably going to say it wrong, so sorry if there's any Greek people listening, but it says apolusis. And I was captured by the idea that the apo means away from what you enjoy. It's like this idea of looking back on what you've enjoyed and seeing if there's any fulfillment or legacy to that. You see, on my Cadbury's wrapper, I don't know whether you've seen it, but on the back it says, obey your mouth. It says, give in to your senses. It looks good, it feels good. I tell you what, it's going to taste good, I know that. But you know what? I'm not going to remember it for that long. I'm not going to look back and go, wow, that Whisper bar really impacted my life. It's changed me. I'm a better person because of it. No, it tasted good for a moment, but I've moved on. So I wonder, as you're listening there, what can you look back on genuinely in your life that you could say, yeah, I enjoyed that, and there's a lasting legacy to it. Perhaps it's a relationship which was broken but now fixed. Perhaps it's a person in your life who has spent quality time with you and invested in you. These sorts of things are the things that I think the Apostle Paul is really getting to? How have you and I partnered with God's creative work, finding what He's placed within us and provided us with for the benefit of not just myself, but the community and the relationships around me? I'm going to read this passage again just to pull all of that together. Here's what it said. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. So we've called this series The Pursuit of Godliness. You might notice we've put a Y in there instead of an I. We haven't made a typo. We've worked out how to spell. We've got spell check. It's okay. But we've just felt like the position of that I in godliness is almost misplaced, because if we're talking about I as the center of my pursuit of God, how I become a better person, how I get a better life, how God can provide for what I want, we've missed the point. Instead, a bit like in the movie, we've put a Y in the middle of godliness, because it's all about you. It's all about being satisfied in you, seeking Him first, seeking His will and His desires, offering up what I have got and stewarding those things to the best of my ability. So let me leave you with this question. When you look at your life, when you look at your time and your treasures and your talents, are you an owner or are you a steward? Thanks so much for joining with us today. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for joining us for the message here at Renewal. We hope you've been inspired, encouraged and challenged by what you've heard, and that it will be of great purpose for you and others. This year we are celebrating Renewal's 50th Jubilee year, which is really exciting for us. To find out how you can get involved, why don't you go to renewalcc.com/50. Yes, that's the big 50. If you'd like to know more about what it means to be a Christian, then why not sign up for our Next Steps program? Go to renewalcc.com/next steps, fill out the contact form, and one of our friendly team will be in touch. Don't worry, we won't spam you. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our online channels at YouTube, and also you can stay up to date by going to our Renewal podcast at renewalcc.com/media or searching on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Every Monday we'll release a new episode so you can stay right up to date. Finally, if you like the work we do here, you can donate to Renewal by going to renewalcc.com/give. All donations are gratefully received. Have a blessed week ahead, and we will see you soon.